Hi, this is Tim from Garden Hands. It's the 3rd of March. It's about noon today and it's 35 degrees already, so the pails are dripping. We're hoping to get started, get our pan running today. This is the outside of our syrup shed. We'll go look inside the shed and see what we got going. So this is the inside of this syrup shack. All the lumber came from across the road at the farm. It was a windbreak that we had gotten old and the trees were huge and poor. So we cut all those trees, had a local neighbor that helped us cut them, and we hired another neighbor down the road that has a bandsaw. And I think we had around 9,000 or 10,000 feet of lumber that we sawed up. And I think we used just everything. When we got done, we didn't hardly have anything left, so it worked out real well. Had two other gentlemen that are carpenters, and I worked alongside them. And we started in December of 2018 and we finished in January, just ahead of the 2019 season. It's been so neat. It's just a cool place for the family to gather, have lunch during the day and play with the kids at night, kind of when we're boiling sap, tell stories. So anyway, we'll go down to the other end of it and we'll show you where we start, where we bring the sap in and bring the firewood in. So down on this end, we've got a spot that's a little bit lower that we use when we fire it. And when we bring our firewood in, we bring it in through these doors. So when we bring our sap in, we bring it in on the Kubota, or side by side. We come in, we back up to this door, and we use a small pump here. So obviously we'd hook one hose on from this to the tank, and we'd transfer it in the bulk tank, or we have a small surge tank or a head tank just right above the evaporator. We can hold 600 or 700 gallons in our tank, so that's a big run for us. But a couple times we've had it full. So after we've unloaded the sap, then we'll start the evaporator. So here's where we store our wood. Right now we're still using some pine from the slabs that we had sawed. We have another year's worth of pine, which is not good, but we mix it with some hardwood from the woods here too. So we use our wood from here, and we've got some totes that we carry wood over in. We have to bring it in from the other farm. And we'll use this amount of wood here in about 3 days, I think, something like that, if we're boiling pretty good. So then it goes from the wood pile to the evaporator. When we poured our cement here, we poured our step up about 12 or 14 inches, or we have a step that's down that much. So when you fire the wood, we don't have to bend way down. Some guys, the evaporator sits on the ground, and that's, as you get older, you think of things like this, I guess. Anyway, we fire this. We try to fire it with this softwood every 10 minutes about. If we had hardwood, we might be able to go a little longer, but it works real well just to have the wood right here. It's so handy. And then when we start getting low on wood, we bring it over and we back right up to the door with our pickup and unload the wood here. In the bottom of this is a vent, and you can set this for whatever certain days you need more draft or less draft. We have real good draft here with the way this house or shack is built, with the height of our chimney. We've always got almost too much draft at once to draw the heat through real quick. So we put a couple of bricks in the front here to slow it down a little bit. Anyway, here's where the ashes would accumulate, is down in this pan. So now we'll see where our head tank is, where we bring our sap into before it gets to the evaporator. So on this side of it is where our sap enters the pan. First it comes in from the pump that we looked at through a hose, and I have a small filter. It's a 40 mesh filter on our line that comes in up on top. So we can hold 60 gallons. That's 3 hours of boiling for us, kinda roughly. So we know that when we empty our bulk tank and it's all in here, that we know when we need to slow down on firing so we don't end up running out of sap. The sap comes in to the tank up on top. We have a valve here we can shut it off with, or we got one here too. It comes down this line and into the first float box. So when the sap comes in, it comes in this tube here into the fitting, and there's a float inside of here that regulates the height, so we set it. Comes into here and it goes into the back. There's a tube right here. If you can see that. This tube right here goes into the flue pan and it stays in a tube, and it goes through the tube or through the flue pan way down to the other end of it. That way that by flowing in through that tube, the cold sap is introduced back here, and by the time it gets back here, it's been warmed up, so we don't have cold sap hitting a real hot flue, which would create more niter right there. Niter is the sugar sand or the mineral that's in your sap. Everybody has it, and you filter it out. So when we first start, the whole pan and the syrup pan, which we'll get to next, is full of just sap. As we keep going, we heat that up, and as it boils down, more sap comes in here, and the sap starts to condense. And as it does that, we start drawing some off down on this end and then putting it back in here to get our sap or our syrup flowing. Once we get that flow, or once we get our pan sweetened, then it does it. We don't have to fool around taking syrup off from this end, putting it back in here and redoing it. But you have to get your concentration built up. And it takes quite a few hours for us, usually, to get to that point. So this is our sap box. The next one is what I call the syrup box. This one regulates the level in the syrup pan, the smaller flat bottom pan, which is lower. We want a lower level in that one. And we try and keep about 3/4 of an inch to an inch of syrup in the syrup pan. The less you keep in, the quicker it can boil. And it's kind of about getting your stuff through as fast as you can. It keeps the color a little bit lighter. The longer it sits and boils, the darker it's going to get. It doesn't mean that it's any poorer or worse syrup. It just gets a little bit darker. And a lot of people like a real dark syrup. If you have it nice and light, it looks prettier. Float consists of is just a piece of it's a stainless little box that's sealed that doesn't get liquid in it, so it floats. And then we can set it by turning this handle. We set our height with that. When we get close to having syrup that's going to come off, we watch our dial. And this dial is in degrees. We take and put this in a pan of boiling water, and you should do it every day because your pressure changes and your barometric pressure changes, so it will change some. When we get ready to start drawing syrup off that's finished, that's ready, we have a thermometer, and that thermometer has a small screw in the back of it, so we can turn this dial, or turn the outside of it, and move the degree marks to where we want to be. So we'll go over to the stove and we'll put a pan of water on the stove and boil it. And when it's boiling, it should read 212 degrees. When it's boiling, we put the 0 to line up with our needle here. So that means that 0 is 212 degrees. We want to take our syrup off at 218 to 219 degrees. So when it gets up, there's a 7 on here that's real bold. So that 7 is 7 degrees above the 212. So that would be 219 degrees that we take this off at. We've had it in years before where if we take it off a little bit after that, or if we boil it again on the stove to filter it, you boil it and take a little more water out, and then it'll crystallize in the bottom of your jars a little bit. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that you've taken a little more water out than you needed to, so it got a little bit more concentrated. So on top of our shack, we have a cupula, which is, it's got louvers on it that we've kind of had to invent ourselves. Our carpenter was real good when we did this. It has a door the length of the cupula, which is about 8 feet long, and it's a couple feet wide. So we have hinges, and we can tip, and I'm doing this, and she's getting a picture of it outside. So we can open our cupula to whichever way the wind is blowing. If the wind is blowing from one direction, we can open the other side. And that cupula helps us vent the building real well. We're going to look at our filtering system, what we use for filters and how we do that. To draw the syrup off, we just open the valve. We don't open it full, we open it so it just drizzles in, and here's our filters. This is pretty high tech here. Anyway, all we did for our filters was here's a stainless pail that it's filtered into, and we cut a hole in a plastic pail, and we had a small plastic pail that we used. That goes in there, and I'm going to take this apart. When we use the filters, when we're doing this, we wet these with some warm water just to get them damp, and then they seem to flow better. So that sets in there like that. And we don't ever fill this pail real full, we'll put a gallon or so in. So we have 3 thin filters that we use that we get from our local maple supply, and 1 Orlan filter. This is the heavy one. And these, we reuse these, we'll clean them at night, we'll take them home and soak them in hot water and just rinse them off to clean them. The same that we do with this, and we use a new one of these every year, maybe 2 of them even. As they get used more, you can tell you don't want to wash these in a washing machine or wring them out, or we let them air dry at night. So we have 3 or 4 of these that we use, so we can clean them up at night and let them sit and then use them the next day. We also take our syrup pan off as needed, so when it builds up with niter, probably clean it every 3 days. A lot of producers will have a couple of these pans so they can clean one up and have it ready to go for the next day. So anyway, this is the filtering part. Next we'll go over to the stove where we heat it up again and do the second filtering of it. So we've drawn the syrup off the evaporator and we bring it over in with this pail. And we have pans that we use here, just kitchen pans of whatever size we need. And we try to do this when we get 3, 4, 5 gallons of syrup accumulated, so maybe once a day. Our evaporator is rated at 30 gallons per hour, 30 gallons of sap per hour. Realistically, with this kind of wood that we have, we probably do 20 gallons. We don't push it that hard. So we do 20 gallons an hour, and it's about a 40-to-1 ratio of sap to syrup produced. So it takes 2 hours to get a gallon of syrup. So if we boil for 8 hours, we can get 4 gallons in a day. So we bring it over to this point with a pail, and we'll put it into some pans to warm it up, some stock pots. Heat it up in our pots on the stove. We'll heat it to 191 degrees so that it's warm enough. And we don't want to boil any more water out of it. We don't want to get it to condense too far. So after we heat it, we'll pour it back into these pails because it's a little bit easier to pour, and pour it into the top of this filter. This filter uses vacuum to draw. This will be clamped down on top of 1 more Orlan filter. This is Orlan, and then 2 or 3 of these paper filters. They'll sit in here. So this has a lid right here that these sit on. And the top sits on here, and it gets clamped down with 3 clamps. You turn on the vacuum, which is below this level here. This will draw, if you fill this with syrup, it'll draw it down through, and it draws down through real quick. You're not sitting around waiting. And this is still hot, so it's just got done boiling. Draws it down through, and we know how much this holds. It holds about 2 gallons, or that's the most that we put in here is 2 gallons. And then we have another valve at the bottom that you open to fill your jars. And this shuts, and it stops dripping right away. It's very convenient for doing for filtering, and it's the right size for us. It isn't too big. So this unit gets taken home each night after we get done filtering. We take this home or take it to the house and rinse this out. It's syrup. It rinses off relatively easy. So we can rinse this out, and these filters can be rinsed off also. They're very easy to clean. So once we're done canning, we have a fair amount of counter space, and the son-in-laws and I kind of built this out of what we had left for scraps almost. Like I said, we ran out of material just about. So we just got a couple pieces of countertop at Menards and put those together, and we've got enough storage underneath to store jars that we're going to use, and a few totes for filters and snacks and plates and tools and whatever else we need there just to keep them up off the floor, and it's worked out real well. Thanks again. Appreciate you watching, and it's going to be a good day for collecting today. Temperature's going to be in the 50s, so we should be making a lot of syrup. Put in a few extra hours tonight probably, and maybe make another video. Thanks for watching.